So we're finding the greatest common factor. You're trying to figure out what number can both of these terms be divided by evenly so that it's not a decimal. So we can write it out, or you can do it in your head. What are the factors of 8? 1 and 8, 2 and 4, anything else? No. What are factors of 18? 1 and 18, 2 and 3 and 6. What are their common factors? They have 1 in common and they have 2 in common. Do they have anything else in common? So for this you would just write GCF equals 2. That's it. For B, we have a 10x and we have a 25. Do they both have an x in common? So your greatest common factor is just going to be a number. It cannot be the variable because both of them don't have the variable. What's the greatest common factor of 10 and 25? 5. That's it. Good. Done. Now for this one, remember, if they both have a variable, the greatest common factor is the variable with the, we talked about this last week, smallest exponent. Write this down somewhere and highlight it. This term here has an exponent of 2. This term here has an exponent of what? 1. If there's no exponent, you can imagine that there's a 1. So I know my greatest common factor has to be something, the number, x. Both of these can be divisible, can be divided by x to the power of 1. You figure out which is the smallest exponent, and then that will be your common factor. I can't divide them by an exponent that's larger than it, because then you're going to get a negative answer. Okay, does that make sense? So what is the common factor of 4 and 12? 4. So the greatest common factor is 4x. That's your answer, okay? What about this one? Greatest common factor of 4x squared, 8x, and 12x. Do they all have a common variable? What's the lowest exponent? What's the lowest exponent? Just x to the power of 1. So the greatest common factor is something x. What factors do 4, 8, and 12 have in common? What can they all be divisible by?
2.
There's a higher number. 4. This is the answer. What's the first step in factoring? What's the first thing you have to figure out? Greatest common factor. What's the greatest common factor of 3x squared, 12x, and 18? Do they all have a variable in common? They do. They all have an x. 18 doesn't. Exactly. So it cannot have an x for your greatest common factor. It's just going to be a number. What are all of these terms divisible by? Yep. All of these are divisible by 3. So I would divide each of these by 3. So when you're writing it in factored form, we put the greatest common factor first, and then we divide everything by the greatest common factor to figure out what the factored form is. Because if you can divide it, it means you can go back and multiply it to get the same thing. So what is 3x squared divided by 3?
1x squared.
Just x squared. That's the first part. What is negative 12x divided by 3?
4x.
Negative 4x. You with me? What's positive? Make sure you're including the signs, right? Don't forget the signs. What's positive 18 divided by 3? Positive or negative? That's it. That's the answer. So for this one, the greatest common factor is 10, but we're gonna divide everything by negative 10 because this one starts with a negative. Okay, so I'm gonna divide everything by negative 10. So factored form, I put the greatest common factor in front, right? Negative 10. And then we are going to figure out what goes inside the brackets. What's the first term inside the bracket, Gabriella? X squared. What's the second term inside the bracket? Positive 20 divided by negative 10 is negative 2x. Then I have a negative divided by a negative, positive 3. So we have negative 9x squared, take away 3x plus 9. What is the greatest common factor of all three terms? What can they all be divisible by? 3. Now, because again, it starts with a negative, we're going to divide everything by negative 3, okay? So I'm going to divide each of these by negative 3. What is my answer in factored form? What goes in front? What's the term that goes in front? The greatest common factor. And then what goes in the brackets? You have to actually calculate that. Well, negative divided by negative is a positive. 9 divided by 3? 3. X squared. Negative divided by negative? 3 divided by 3? 1. X. Positive divided by negative? 9 divided by 3? 3. Sorry? What can both of these terms be divided by evenly? 15. Is there a variable in common? Yes, they both have x. This one is x squared and this one is x to the power of 1. So the greatest common factor is always the lowest, the smallest exponent. So, same thing, divide everything by 5x, divide by 5x. And in factored form, 15x, thank you. It would be 15x. What's 15x squared divided by 15x?
X squared.
Just x.
Oh yeah, because it's
X to the power of 2 divided by x to the power of 1 is just x to the power of 1, right?
yeah.
What's a positive divided by a positive? 13 divided by 15, 30 divided by 15. X divided by x gets rid of the x's. It's just 2. This is a question that's going to be on your quiz tomorrow.